Welcome to the Dream 100 Show, the epicenter of influence, collaboration, and exponential growth. You're about to discover the power of relationships. Dream 100 relationships. And you're one relationship away from a totally different business and life. This is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dream 100 Show. Today's topic is about mastering one of the most important skills as a Dream 100 marketer, and that skill is in-person networking. I've been doing a lot of self-reflection, more than I have in quite a while, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and one of them is just continuously reinventing myself, my various businesses, and two, for whatever reason, it's that whole milestone birthday, and I'm turning 40 in roughly a month or so, and I've just been looking at the last 10, 15, 20 years and reflecting on what have been some of those most pivotal moments. Now, I reflected and started with everything personal. So the birth of all of my kids, getting married, other birthdays, career changes, all that kind of fun stuff. But then I started digging a little bit deeper on the business side. And what I realized is that every time I had exponential growth, it was due to some kind of relationship that happened in person. And I'll rattle off a couple of examples. So first, when I started off my first marketing agency, we were doing okay, and I started to really pick up some traction when I joined and got introduced to a group called Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. And within that group, I met somebody at an event who said, "Hey, Michael, you're talking about marketing. All these people in this room are entrepreneurs. You need to start speaking to other EO groups and chapters." I'm like, oh, that sounds like an interesting idea. And he made an introduction to somebody that books the speakers for a chapter in EO Chicago. And I went and spoke at EO Chicago, and I ended up, no pitch, delivering a ton of really great value, and then ended up landing several clients, of which many of those are still clients today. Another example, guerrilla marketing. I ended up becoming, making a long story short, becoming the chief marketing officer of Guerrilla Marketing International. And I tried working that relationship digitally and through email and kind of through social media, but nothing really came to that next level until I was there in person. And I can give you dozens and dozens of other examples of things happening in person. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't supplementing things digitally, but when you're talking about really big deals, there usually is going to be some kind of human element that just adds another layer of trust. But what's interesting is that I realized the last couple of years, my networking game has been completely off the rockers. And I'm going to share some things that I really haven't shared publicly. So I want to try and be a little bit more raw. And it's not that I'm being not authentic on this podcast, but I want to get deeper, and I want to get more to the heart of things. And I want to get more to talking about kind of the pains and kind of paint the possibilities of what's possible a little bit more, rather than simply giving you tactics week after week after week. I've given you so many tactics and strategies, and those tactics and strategies definitely work, but there's also another human element to all of this. But I've been having a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. One reason is my first book that was published, I should know the date off the top of my head, but let's say 10 plus years ago. And that book, I coined the phrase Web 3.0 marketing, marketing in the moment. I talked about things that literally, some things that have just came to fruition in the last year or two. I feel like I've published a lot of great things since then, but nothing has ever compared to that particular book and being in that moment. And I started feeling that imposter syndrome when I was going to networking events where I would end up going and sitting in my hotel room. This happened even 6 months or so ago, where I was at a really high-profile event. When I say high profile, I mean movers and shakers and lots of really amazing entrepreneurs. And instead of embarking on the activities, one of which was going on a super yacht, I ended up going in my hotel room and working. And I couldn't figure out why until recently. And it's this imposter syndrome that I've realized that a lot of us have, that whole fake it till you make it. And like a lot of people feel like where they're at isn't enough, that they can't contribute anything, or they don't fit in with that crowd. And the crazy thing is that I've been running in and out of that crowd since I was like 22 years old. And it just takes hold of you. But I want to share a perspective with you, and I want to share an idea. Don't want to call it a tactic, but this is what has started to help move me in the right direction. So I started again looking back at what have kind of been the difference at some of those events that I went to. What was the difference 10, 15 years ago versus some of the events that I've been to in the last 2 or 3 years? And the difference has been the concept of give to get. When I look back at everything else that I was doing many, many years ago, I was giving first. I was showing up to events and I was saying, well, tell me about your business. Great. Would you mind if we do a 5 or 10 minute session completely on me where I just throw some ideas to you and maybe those will be helpful to help you grow your business from a marketing perspective? Like I would throw things out there. I would put myself out there and just practice this concept of give to get. And when I've looked at the last couple of years, it's not necessarily been the opposite, but it was a combination of not feeling like I had enough to give in tandem with this whole imposter syndrome of like, oh, the woe is me, and I feel like I should be so much farther along. I mean, I've been at this game since I was 15 years old, and I turned 40 in a month. And I'm like, shouldn't I have more money or more fame or followers and all of that? And at the end of the day, we're all in the place that we're meant to be in at this moment in time. But it's about stepping back out of your comfort zone when you're doing in-person networking and looking at what are some of the weapons that you have in your arsenal. What are some of the tools that you have in your tool chest that are somewhat unique to you, where you can walk around and just contribute. Instead of having to size up the room, instead of trying to figure out who are the movers and shakers in a particular room, a Dream 100 marketer takes that room and looks at all the different opportunities as somewhat equal until they know what they're working with. And here's what I mean by that. I've often made a mistake where I'll size up the room and I'll gravitate towards a particular area, but come to find out that the person that I was sitting with at breakfast was somebody that I could have done amazing things with, but I didn't spend that time really. I just like, oh, tell me about your business. Oh, that's great. And then I kind of moved on because I thought that I knew where I wanted to head at a particular conference, or I thought that I should be in that breakout or sitting at that table or going to that area. But from a networking standpoint, when there's a lot of people in a room, if you start to practice this concept of give to get, it starts to catch on. Because what ends up happening is one person's going to say something to another person's going to say something to another. And I literally tested this out last week. And I went to a networking event where I really didn't know anyone. I may have known one person that was in the room. It was cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. There was a speaker, but it really was designed to be a lot more heavy on the networking side. And instead of just the usual spiel, oh, what do you do? And tell me about yourself and tell me about your family, I just listened. And then I asked a couple of different questions. Love that you talked about that. Have you considered X? Someone that I think could be interesting for you to meet. I would love to make an introduction here. Have you ever read XYZ book? Have you ever listened to XYZ podcast? And then what I did was, rather than just talking, I started executing on the different things that I was promising or telling these people. So, for example, one of the people in the room was a real estate agent. I don't serve real estate agents. We don't work with real estate agents, period. I don't think I've ever worked with, no, I shouldn't say never, because I actually have worked with a few, but it's been quite a while. And they were talking about some of the challenges in standing out in a crowded market. So most markets, there's a lot of realtors, and the real estate industry right now is a bit soft, like it's really competitive. And then I started sharing a few things. And I said, well, have you heard of Platform Marketing, which is a marketing agency that serves real estate agents? No, I haven't heard of that. So made an email introduction while we were talking. Have you ever thought about becoming the local celebrity by having your own podcast? Well, no, I haven't thought about that. So I actually had a white paper that I just wrote a couple of weeks ago. So I converted it to a PDF. I think it was in Google Docs, and I emailed that over. I didn't think to give my business card because I was emailing stuff anyways. I didn't even have business cards, but I took the approach of give to get. And what's interesting, and I did this in various ways throughout the evening. What's interesting though, is I got an email yesterday morning, someone that I did not meet at the event, that they heard about me from like 2 or 3 layers after the real estate agent conversation. And what's crazy about them, like, oh, I heard you had all these great resources, but I heard it from like, and I don't remember the exact names, but heard it from this person who heard it from that person. And it just sounds like you really know your stuff. So can we have a conversation? And this person has a business that's in a market that we serve. Didn't even know they were there. So how do you actually take all of these different things that I'm throwing at you and put it into practical Dream 100 networking? Now, the asterisk to what I just shared is that those particular events are not necessarily Dream 100 events. Dream 100 clients, Dream 100 relationships, again, they have to be game-changing relationships. Those events are more prospecting events. But the core message of how you actually network, whether you're at one of those events or you're at the #1 industry event for the industry that you serve, that could be a game-changing event, that you know people within your Dream 100 are there. It's all about this concept of give first to get later. And if you've been paying attention to how I've taught you the Dream 100 framework, when you're starting your outreach, when you're inviting people to your podcast, everything that you're doing is giving to get. You're not sending out messages saying, can we get on a phone conversation? Do you have 5 minutes of your time? Pardon my professional persistence. You're not in that realm. You're commenting authentically on things. You're sending them resources. You're pointing them in certain directions with areas that you feel that you can help them with without expecting anything in return. The podcast piece is that icing on the cake. I'd love to have you on my show. Here's why I want to do it. It's going to give you exposure. We're going to promote it. I'm going to send out to my email database. We're going to give you video clips without me in them. You can use those for social media. Would just love the opportunity to share some of your insights with my audience. It's all about give to get. My challenge for you is to look at when you're going to some of these different events, forget all this imposter syndrome stuff. And I know it's easier said than done, but look at how you can be of service as you're walking around the room. And it doesn't just have to be, oh, I want to introduce you to this person I just met. That's not what it simply means. It means to actively listen and to start to find certain cues where when it then makes sense, you can infuse yourself into that conversation. Hey, would it be helpful if I sent you X? Would it be helpful if I did X? But the one thing that I want to caution you on with this particular strategy is you have to give the information in a way that doesn't make the other person feel like an idiot. So hear me out on this. So one of the great things with the Entrepreneurship Organization is that every month you get together with a forum. And in that group, you leverage something called Gestalt communication. And Gestalt communication is all about sharing experiences rather than advice. So in what I'm teaching you, you're definitely sharing more advice. You're saying, would it be helpful if I gave you a resource on XYZ problem that you just talked about? But that's why I'm using a phrase like, would it be helpful? May I send you X? Rather than, well, geez, I can fix that. You didn't think to do this? You have to make sure that you're not crossing that line from a networking standpoint where the other person walks away like, geez, they made me feel like an idiot. You want them to walk away feeling like, oh, geez, that person really was helpful. They wanted to help. They wanted to pay it forward. So keep that in mind when you're doling out some of your information, that you want to kind of toe that line a little bit. You don't necessarily have to use the phrase, oh, in my experience, but if you start to add a couple of those different phrases to soften things up a little bit, if you're going to give some harsh info, you've got to soften the blow a little bit. But just keep that in mind when you're having a conversation. People don't want to feel like well, geez, I should have thought of that. I can't believe this, because then it doesn't really work for you or for them. I know this was a little bit long-winded on this episode to get to my core point of give to get. But I wanted to share a little bit of the backstory of even me. This master marketer, so to speak, feels like they have imposter syndrome sometimes and didn't want to network at some of the most important events that I should have been networking at, because that was the right audience. And there were Dream 100 potential relationships there. But it finally took me to realize and reflect on what had worked in the past was all about being of service, speaking, giving great content, sharing resources, making introductions when they made sense. That is how you get ahead with Dream 100 relationships. The type of people that you're going after, the caliber of people, is completely different than the everyday person. They're in completely different leagues. When I'm looking at the people that I'm targeting for the Dream 100, for the Dream 100 business, we're going after people like Tony Robbins, Les Brown. We're not going after somebody that wrote one book and sold 50 copies. I mean, we're looking at going after the highest of level of people. And to continue to stand out, you have to be of service. You have to be giving, because they're used to the opposite. They're used to people wanting to clamor and what can I grab from that relationship? But when you come from a place of service and giving to get, you stand out from the crowd. It bumps you to the top of the list, and you start to secure those Dream 100 relationships. Get out there, start networking like a Dream 100 marketer. Thank you as always for tuning in. Leave your questions, comments, thoughts, ideas. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Michael Tasner signing off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Until next week.